Yo, what's up, everyone? I'm excited to introduce to you Linda Lin, formerly Linda Chu. She is a CS manager, and she worked up her way, through this, um, as an account executive, and then became a director. So went to management, and then now she consults with tech companies and startups on their customer success strategy. And she also just started a community called, was it the Society of Asian Sales and CS. And so really excited to see what you're creating, and yeah, really excited to have you on my podcast.
Thank you for having me. I feel a lot of pressure since you said you had 83 other podcasts. I'm like 84 or am I 83?
80.
So I'll try to walk in the footsteps of giants. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I think it's so cool, right? I think like the more we like when we first had our conversation, I was like, am I dreaming? Like, is this conversation like really happening? Just because like it is rare, right? I think prior to joining LinkedIn, I was always one of the few Asian people in, customer success, account management, or sales. And I was always just like, oh, like this just is how it is. And then, as soon as I joined LinkedIn and I met Aaron and all these people, I'm like, whoa, like there's actually like, there's a community out here. And when I first connected with you, I was just like, whoa, it's like she's like reading my mind.
I know it's so nuts. And this journey of founding SAS for short, but the Society of Asians in Sales and Success, I've met so many other people who are like-minded to us who have been trying to carve out communities within their company, who are really passionate about this topic of D&I and tech and in sales, or who just really want to engage with other Asian and Asian Americans who are successful in sales and customer-facing roles. And they're really just like creating ways to do that. And so it's it's so funny how we met so randomly, but also so wonderful that there's a lot of people contributing to like building this kind of movement and momentum, because it's not one person or one group that's really going to make a difference. It's a collective of many people doing many things that really moves the needle forward.
Yeah, and it's cool to be, you're like the foundation of the building blocks, right? Like we're almost like pioneers in a way, right? Because like now it makes sense. Like I think I started the Asians in Sales group only 3 months ago, around, was it like July when I started it? But the group kind of just, I just invited a couple people, and then they invited people, and then we were up to 100 members, and it just grew so quickly. So clearly, people are seeking that, that community and that sense of belonging. So I'm excited to see. I mean, this could be like, it could be huge, like 1,000 people, I'm sure, eventually, right? So I'm curious to see how it grows, and yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited for you, honestly.
Me too. I'm super excited to see where it goes. I think there's all this social research in that, when you're in a minority group, whether that's how you identify in terms of your gender or your race or otherwise, you feel uncomfortable kind of associating yourself with that minority status or voicing what you consider a minority opinion, until there's like this tipping point, social research that says, 30%, when you feel like there's 30% of other people who think like you, or, however you associate, you start to feel more confident, particularly in a work setting, to speak up and be yourself and be authentic. And so not everyone is going to have the luxury, especially we're talking about a minority of Asians in tech sales, to be one of 30% in their own company. But that doesn't mean that we can't form that community outside of our companies and really, bridge that for people across the country. And so I'm super excited. And I've seen this kind of similar success pattern. I started the Women in Sales group at Slack, which is now like well over 200 women, which is phenomenal. Some of our top AEs and top CSMs and top sales leaders are women. And, early on, we weren't 30% of the sales group, but now it's close to 50, if not over 50%. And so you really see a shift in how women sit at the table, how people feel comfortable talking about issues specific to women. And you just see that kind of shift that I was talking about when you reach that kind of critical mass. And so that's kind of my like North Star and mission with forming this group, is to just keep building a community. And so more people can feel they can really be authentic and talk about the issues that are important to them.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I mean that's like a double whammy, right? Like being Asian is hard enough, but then you have the other, right, in a male dominated, at least when it comes to executive leadership, right? Like having a seat at the business table. Um, yeah, so that's, I mean, that's pretty incredible that you've had that much success. And I know, like, I often hear that a lot of like Asians, we feel like we have to like overcompensate by like outworking our competition, right? Like, oh, like maybe if I work harder, I'll get a seat at the business table. But we know that that's not the case, right? Like there's so much more to it than just the numbers aspect, right? Like the results aspect of being in sales.
Totally. That's such an interesting dynamic because for a lot of people that come from Asian background, they're kind of raised with this upbringing of work hard. Especially, all people come from kind of an immigrant background have this kind of ethos of if you just work hard, you'll find success and so on. And that's kind of drilled into your head from when you were little. And when you go into sales in particular and you have a sales quota, then it just becomes really natural for you to bring that into the work environment. You're like, well, I'll just make more cold calls. I'll just prospect more. I'll just do more outbound. I'll just send more, whatever. I'll close more deals and I'll find success. And yes, that certainly does mean you'll find some success numbers wise. And a great part of sales, as my friend Rachel Lee said yesterday in our SaaS panel, sales is about input in and input output from that. And so it's like a great environment actually for people with that mentality. But there's also this need to like do self-advocacy because sometimes you'll realize work ethic is not enough, and work ethic may mean you hit numbers, but doesn't mean you get promoted. It doesn't mean you get the opportunities or the projects or the roles you want. And so it's so important, particularly I think for Asians, to think about what they're doing in terms of their self-advocacy. Do you have goals? Are you verbalizing them? Are you talking with those with your managers about those? Are you self-advocating for yourself beyond just your numbers and staying late in the office and hitting all your numbers?
Yeah, that's a good point. And it seems like, one of the reasons why you started SaaS is like the whole networking aspect of it as well, right? Like not only internally, but even outside of the company, right? Because, when I speak to any leaders like further along, like much older leaders, their advice is always like, yeah, I wish I found mentors much earlier in my career. I didn't realize that until much later. So every executive, every VP, every director always tells me that. And they said, that's good that you're starting now because honestly, like I didn't have that mentality until like a little bit later on in my career.
Yeah, it's so funny. I don't think I really understood why people had mentors when I first started my career. So when I was an AE, in 21, I understood that there were people who were more successful and experienced I could learn from. But I thought, you can read articles, you can read books, you can go to listen to podcasts and go to events. But I didn't really understand what does it mean to find someone who's going to be your mentor. And I think, as I get older and more senior in my career, you realize how important mentorship means. And particularly, I think about sponsorships, so not just like mentorship, which sometimes means like someone's giving you advice and mentoring you, but people who actually sponsor you, people who have the ability and the influence and the power to bring you and your name into the room, the proverbial room, so to speak, when there's like a key project or a key territory or a key account, and they want the best person, to be a part of that project or that team or that whatever it is. So I really have been trying, more in recent years to find sponsorship. But yeah, I think for mentorship, Christina Kaznowski, who's a mentor of mine and who leads our CS and professional services team at Slack, she said something that always stuck with me, which is you have to find your board of directors, your like internal board of directors. And so I've kind of figured out who those people are over time. And it's a mix of like people in my industry, people in my personal life that I grew up with, people who are totally not in my career field at all, but people that I just trust and have my best interests at heart and know me really well and what's important to me. And when I make a big career decision or a role change or whatever it is, I take that to my board of directors and I ask them for their advice, and they give me the best mentorship.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome that you have your internal board of directors. I think people think of it from a business context, but not like your own, right? So that's really good advice. I think Tony Robbins is like is a big proponent of that, right? A lot of these like, self-help gurus, um and it's interesting, like you can even, and I like your how you talked about sponsorship versus like mentorship, right? Because I think some people think it's the same thing. But does your mentor or does your sponsor have like the authority? Do they have the reach or the influence to be able to actually truly get you on like a big project or something, right? So I think that's a key point that you brought up that I think not a lot of people think about. So that
Yeah, and
nice.
yeah, I think both are important. Like you need people who are your mentor, who you can just bounce ideas off of, talk through problems, hear different perspectives. But that is, I think, the important thing there is that that's important, but it's distinct from people who may also be able to bring you into the right rooms and right conversations. So both are really important.
Yeah, and then so what? Because you've had so much success at a corporate level, right? You worked for some of the biggest, fastest growing companies. I'm curious what made you want to do a little bit more entrepreneurial consulting work because, I mean, your career has been pretty phenomenal, and I'm curious, like, why people make that switch sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny to hear you say that because I don't, I guess, think of myself as like so successful, having achieved so much, but it's great to hear that from the third party, I guess. But I have had some really great opportunities and worked with great people and worked with great initiatives and worked for some really amazing companies. So I've been really lucky to have had a really fun and rewarding career. But for me, in terms of leaving being a full-time operator, there's a couple of things that went through my head. And the first is that I became a mother a year ago and I wanted to have more flexibility. Time is the currency that matters the most to me right now, as opposed to the other ways I used to measure, value. And so one was that just being able to control my schedule and pick what I worked on and when I wanted to work on things. The second was kind of this hypothesis that I had that working with early stage teams was going to be a great opportunity for me, that my next role might be the head of CS at an early stage company. And I wanted to test that hypothesis, but in like kind of a safe way by
Uh,
try before you buy. So, advising early stage startups, I get to kind of feel out the founding team, the product, the sales motion, understand their customers, their retention, their stickiness, their value, et cetera, without fully committing. And so for me, that was great because I had worked at Zendesk and Slack early, but also at really safe times when it was super safe bets to join those companies. And so it was kind of a test for me this year to get involved with some companies much earlier. Um, and then I think the last thing, which is really weird because I'm not like a risk taker, that's not part of my MO. But I think this whole year of COVID and just like total uncertainty and total kind of chaos, it made me feel more bold in some ways, and it made me feel more open to taking this risk of leaving a wonderful job at a wonderful company and going out on my own and being an entrepreneur and running my own business. And for some reason, for all the reasons why you shouldn't do it, it also became exciting to me. Um, so yeah, I put myself on this road and I'm enjoying it so far. But I haven't even told my mom about it. I haven't told her I quit my job and am doing my own thing. So we'll give it a couple more months and see how it goes. And then maybe I'll tell her, but maybe I'll never tell her.
that's a good point, actually. I would say most Asian parents or most immigrant families like don't want you to take like risk, right? Especially because on paper, like most people would be like, you'd be crazy to leave the situation that you've had, right? Like in terms of just stability, like, yeah, I mean, just like the prestige, right, of working for like a really cool company. Um, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think we all have to go through that, right? Like, I feel like that's why I don't see as many Asian entrepreneurs, because there's that stigma where like, well, my parents will kill me if I told them the truth.
Yeah, but I would challenge you and me to think about that as well, because for a lot of us, our parents took the biggest risk of all because they immigrated to a new country with nothing and no skill set and no language skills, and they gave up everything to, come build a better life. So sometimes I also wonder to myself, are we actually primed for success as being entrepreneurs? Because if anyone has that spirit of work ethic and perseverance and risk taking, the immigrant Asian mentality is definitely lends itself to that. And so I think it's really interesting. Like if you look at great companies like YouTube and Zoom and Gusto, they have Asian founders or co-founders that really led there. And so I think we're going to see a huge wave of success from the Asian American community going forward in tech as we find our footing and build our community. And if we continue to like invest in this community and support each other, I think we'll see more and more Asians going into entrepreneurial paths. And in fact, I was really excited. I just saw on LinkedIn that Dave Wu just started Hyphen Capital, which is going to be a syndicate investing in Asian American founders, which is just badass and phenomenal. So I'm so excited to see all the success they're going to have there.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome that you're optimistic and you see that vision, right? I think that's a fair point, right? They take, that's the biggest risk of all, right? Leaving a country and completely just like changing your worldview. But I think sometimes that's why they don't want you to take a risk, because they're like, I didn't bust my ass so that you can like go and then start over and. But I like your optimism. I think one of the things that we need to do a better job at is just like, I think there's certain Asian groups that, like for instance, like my Korean friends typically hang out with like other Koreans, right? Or, the Viets will hang out with like the Viets or Filipinos. So I think there could be a lot more, but I do see it changing, right? But yeah, it is interesting. Like I think BLM actually in a way has helped all of us come together more, right? I think ever since this all happened, like I'm like, whoa, like Asians are coming together. Like this is crazy. Like my whole life, like I was trying to create all these things, and I've only seen it more recently. So
Yeah, for sure. It's such an interesting dynamic. And you and I are both in Asian interests, fraternities, sororities. So we're in that Greek system, and we see that it's hard to unify Asians together because there is no such thing, right? Like we don't have anything in common otherwise than our skin color and our eye color and our hair color. Like these are very, very distinctive subgroups with their own culture and heritage and language. And so you're right, there's all these kind of like sub elements to the community. So that becomes challenging. Like, what are your commonalities and where is your common kind of ground? And I do think that this past year and all the things happening in the world has made people think less about where they're different and think about where they have more things in common and what they can be united on and who has a shared experience, and just having more empathy for other people's experiences. So yeah, I think that are all things I've been thinking about this year.
yeah, and I'm curious, because I think, were you pretty active in Greek life
No,
back then?
not at all. I was there physically, but I wasn't like super active. I think I was so busy balancing trying to survive academically at Cornell. And then also I was working two jobs, sometimes three jobs at one time to like pay my grocery bills and pay my way through school. So I didn't have a ton of time to invest. And I don't think also like I identified that much as someone who could be a leader in the Asian community until much later in life. Like it took me a while to like be comfortable with that personality and that part of me, and to also realize I had something to contribute and to want to be a part of like creating better community for others. So yeah, it's funny. Like I didn't step into it as much even when I was in an Asian sorority.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a pretty deep topic. We can probably talk a lot about that, right? Because it's like, because I also never really thought about that concept as well. Like, oh, I'm a leader. And then when I kind of do reflect back to the college days, I was like, oh wait, like I was a leader. Like I hosted so many events, but you just don't think about it because you just kind of go through the motions. But all the stuff I did, with being rush chair for like 6 semesters, and the VSA and all this stuff, and like TASA, whatever. But I'm like, oh wait, like I'm doing exactly like what I'm doing now for LinkedIn, but just in college and even in high school. But I guess like what kind of helped you see that you're like, oh wait, like I am a leader and I'm capable of creating like anything that I want. Like how did that shift?
Yeah, totally. I think, for me, like all growing up and into the early days of my professional journey, I thought of leaders as people with like a lot of power in terms of their title. Like they sat on the top of an org of 60 people and they had line managers under them and they make decisions and they had budget and they were leaders, and those people didn't look like me. So I don't think I like saw in myself what it was to be a leader, but when I think about it, I've been a leader my whole life. Like I've been a person who knows how to influence other people. I've been a person who knows how to rally communities and support causes and get people to take action. And I've been a person who knows how to lead without authority. And so that's translated really well and been a skill I've built as a CSM in terms of like you're working with a customer and you're getting them to agree to certain things and you're persuading them to follow your best practices and you're guiding them on a certain path. And then it translated really well when I became a manager and actually was in a position of some kind of leadership. But I never looked at myself as a leader, even when I managed, other people's careers, as like I'm your leader. Because I'm your leader, I looked at myself as I'm your leader because you're giving me the opportunity, and I'm going to lead with influence and not with authority. And we're all on the ship together. I'm steering it, but we all are on the ship, and we all need each other to move the ship in the right direction. So yeah, I think my like whole philosophy on what true leadership is and what kind of leaders I admire and what kind of leader I aspire to be has really changed a lot over time. I read this, like the MBTI profiles.
Hmm.
I never really bought in much, but I did mine a few years back, and I'm in INFJ, which is like a super rare one. It's like 2% of all people, and like 1% of all women are this personality type. But
Wow.
um, when I read this line about like what kind of leaders this personality type are, I think that was really interesting. And it said like this type of leader doesn't lead through like a loud voice. They lead through really quiet confidence and just by getting people's buy-in over time because of the way that they work and their values and their ability to lead with inspiration and creativity and bring people along a journey. And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, that's been me all along. I just didn't know that. And because I didn't know that, I didn't know how to tap into it. I didn't know how to harness it. I didn't know how to use it to propel me forward and to be an even better leader. And so I think a lot about that, about like, what are my strengths and who am I and what's natural to me and how do I lead in a really authentic way.
Wow, that's pretty deep. Yeah. I think it's funny, right? Because as corny as a lot of these things are, like some people are like, oh, it's like astrology, it's like BS, you know? But I'm a huge fan of that type assessor. Like every time I read it, I'm like, oh my God, it's like it's so accurate, you know? And then I look at the people that it's like, what are the possibilities? So mine, it's like Will Smith is a good example of a ENF P, and I'm always like, yes, like he inspires me so much. So I do look to that to see like, okay, what's possible if I truly tap into my leadership skills. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they might be cheesy, but there's no shame in taking a framework that already exists and has worked for thousands of other people and finding a way to make it work for you. So yeah, I'm also a Cancer, but I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means.
yeah, I'm not into that as much, but some people like, empower that too, and it's interesting. I think it's cool because you can take like the stuff that you do like from some of these things, like the Enneagram or the five personalities, whatever, and then you can use when it's helpful, right? But then you don't have to choose to do the stuff that because there's also some not so good stuff that they say, right? But then you can also look at it as like a way of like, okay, at least I have awareness around some of the gaps too.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And like the person that pointed me to this exercise and made me do it was my executive coach. And like I said to you, but earlier, I didn't never even thought much about mentorship, much less paying someone to be your executive coach. But in the last 5 years, I've really come to appreciate what an executive coach can do for you because that person is going to hold a mirror up and point things inwards, and so that you can understand like your own strengths and your own weaknesses, rather than just like the topics you bring, like why am I not getting this promotion? Or like, how do I advance my career this way? It's like, it's not about these external things that you can't actually control and influence. It's, the executive coach really changes your perspective inwards on like, what are the things that you're good at? What are the things that you want? What are the things that are your weaknesses and so on? So I think that's also really powerful to just turn inwards in your kind of reflection on your challenges and opportunities.
I love you were able to communicate that so well because I think a lot of people are curious about like what exactly is a coach? Is it like a mentor that I pay? Like is it like a sponsor that I'm kind of, but I like how you focused on the internal versus the external factors. Because at the end of the day, the internal is all you can control most of the time, right? There's very
For sure.
many external factors that like you literally have, you think you have a say, but most of the time you don't.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think with all things, it's about a little bit of luck and a personality match for sure. I've had more than 5 exec coaches in the last 5 years, many of whom I decided to part ways with because it just wasn't the personality match. I was like, this person doesn't get me. Doesn't resonate with me the way that they communicate. They aren't listening or whatever it might be. But if you keep exploring, eventually you're going to find someone that you're like, okay, this is a really good chemistry match for me, and this person is really able to help me. And it doesn't have to be a paid executive coach, but I think it's good to just, when you find your people, you hold on to them and you go back to them regularly and you let them help you.
Hmm. Yeah, I think being receptive to receiving is like such a valuable skill too, right? Because I think even sometimes the Asian mentality is like and sometimes people value independence or like because of the whole work ethic thing, it's like I don't know. I think that it definitely takes vulnerability to like truly be able to receive and actually like, and then obviously like a natural tendencies want to give back, right? Because you've been helped so much. But I think a lot of Asians, at least the ones I know, like are even afraid to ask for help because they think it shows weakness.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm kind of the opposite. I feel like I am so much more naturally prone to ask for feedback and listen for feedback. Like I almost always start everything from a point of why I shouldn't be doing it or why I am not able to do it or what my weaknesses are is really actually hard for me. And maybe that's as a woman or as an Asian American woman for me to even like think about my strengths. And so
Mm,
I always come from a place of like very vulnerable. And whenever I start like a new initiative or a new role, I'm always like, oh man, like why would I fail? Why am I not the person for this? Why shouldn't I be doing this? Those are the questions that I like bring to my coach and that I think about internally. That's kind of my internal dialogue. So for me, it's actually come pretty naturally to work with mentors and coaches because I'm constantly craving knowing how I can improve. And I think within that, I just have to like, I have to figure out how to better come from a place of positivity and like knowing my strengths and being able to leverage those and having more, self-confidence.
mm.
Yeah.
How do you know when like you're asking for too much feedback versus like trusting your own intuition, right? Because I think we sometimes we could be too much like too receptive to feedback where we're almost like we're not even 100% sure of like you know what I mean? Like we're too adaptive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I was just thinking about this like recently where I realized that I was getting a lot of feedback from like peers, from my team, from my manager, from cross-functional partners. I was getting feedback all the time. And I was like, is this because I asked for it? Is this because I'm like such an open person where people just like feel like they can share? Or is it because like, I don't know, something else? Like, am I just an Asian woman? They look at me and they're like, I could just share with you how I think you could be better. Like you seem like someone I should tell. So I don't know where it stems from, but I've been thinking about it because I think there is a balance
Yeah.
of other people's inputs, our inputs, but your own internal North Star, your own intuition should be much stronger than that. And so how I like to think about it is like you triangulate, right? You start with yourself, your intuition, your point of view, and you like form that and you make it stronger by getting other people's input and you like bounce these ideas of other people. And it's like sonar. So like you bounce it to your board of directors and it comes back a certain way. And then you like refine the way you think about things, refine the way you are asking the question, refine the way that your perspective is. But it's still your perspective and your point of view that is like leading this. And I think, that's a different way to show up in the world, where you're not just someone who is perceived as maybe like kind of weak and shapeable because you're just needing feedback or constantly asking for feedback, but like you're someone who shows up in a way of strength because you lead with a strong point of view, but you're super flexible and you're always asking for input and you're open to collaboration. I think that's just different in terms of how people respond to that and how you feel in that experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I like your analogies. Like the sonar, like definitely resonates, right? I think that's easy to visualize. Um, because yeah, I think like I've struggled where I've gotten too much feedback as well, right? At one point, but then now I feel like I trust myself more and I have like more faith in my decisions. But ultimately, like there's also just self compassion that look like there's gonna be times where I'm gonna mess up and it's not gonna be perfect. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's interesting, right? Because I actually don't know that many like Asian executive coaches as well, right? I feel like it tends to be like a more white dominated industry, at least from from going through all the coaching programs I've gone through. I was often the only Asian, like most of the time.
Mhm.
Have
Yeah.
that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, now that you say it, I can't name a single executive coach now that you say it. So that's an interesting observation. I mean, I think you look for whatever like you can connect to the most. So if I look at, let's say I'm interviewing for a new job, I'm looking at the hiring panel or like my manager or the board of directors or the leadership of that company, or I'm looking for an executive coach, I'm looking at the options. I kind of do like my first scan, and my first scan is like, is anyone Asian here? And if no one's Asian, I'm like, okay, is anyone a woman here? Okay, no, is anyone from Atlanta here? I kind of like look for things that are common to me. I think that's just human nature. Like you want to find someone you can relate to. So I think for me, that's been helpful in my coaching or mentorship relationships, to find someone who I feel like we're connected on some kind of level. They might not be like your mirror and you're like your twin, but maybe, you identify something that is a common ground between the two of you.
And so it's interesting that because I feel like coaching is a relatively like newer like how did you first hear about like hiring like an executive coach? Or was it because you saw a lot of you had mentors that were successful and they were like, "Hey, I use a coach," and then you were kind of, "Oh, maybe I should look for one too."
Yeah. Yeah, it was a combination of all these things. It was the people I admired, like when I talked to them about their success, they always talked about like the things they were working on with their coach. And I was like, oh, you're working with a coach.
Oh,
It's kind of like when you first hear all your friends are working with therapists and you're like, oh, maybe there's something there. Like maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's helpful. Maybe there's value add. I hadn't thought about that for myself. But also, I worked for a great company that gave us professional development funds. So like it became really low friction and low barrier to entry because someone was going to give me money that I could spend. And I was like, should I buy books? Should I join masterclass, or should I, invest in a coach? So that, and then I think also just like the stakes became higher later in my career. Like I was no longer entry level and, just a new AE. Like at some point I was leading pretty big initiatives or big teams. And I just felt like the stakes were higher in my career. So I really wanted all the help I could get. I want all of the people on my side. And so that's when I really started looking into more formal coaches.
hmm. And then like how does one know when they should move on to a different coach, right? Because I think a lot of us have that question. So I hire a coach as well, right? And then sometimes I'm like, am I just I don't know. Sometimes I don't know when is the right time. I guess like I can trust my intuition, but sometimes I'm like, oh, like they were very helpful. I guess like sometimes like you get what you want out of that, and then you kind of know like intuitively like when you should move on.
Yeah, I mean, like anyone who's an influence on you, they should inspire you. So if you talk to this person and after a few conversations you're like, I'm walking away with nothing, like there's nothing here that's like inspiring me, you're lighting no fires for me, I'm not excited after our conversations, you're not making me think of new ideas, you're not challenging me, I don't feel drawn to this conversation, then those are all signs to exit, stage left. And it's different because it's not your manager, right? You're not like stuck with them because they're your manager, so you have a choice. you're in a position of power where you can pick someone who does inspire you and is fun for you to work with. Because that's, I mean, and for you to have a great relationship, I think with someone who's a mentor or a coach or a sponsor or whatever, it has to come from a place of like true trust and liking each other and shared passions, or maybe similar styles. So whatever that is, if you're not feeling it, then you should definitely just move on.
Cool. This is all really good advice. You're clearly like very intelligent. I think this will resonate with a lot of people because I think many of us, see leadership qualities in ourselves, but sometimes like you just need that one person to like believe in you, right? So I think being proactive. Some of my takeaways is being proactive about finding mentors, finding sponsors, kind of putting yourself out there, going thinking more about the internal dialogue, right? Whether it's empowering yourself by using an executive coach or a therapist. So just exploring a little bit more internally. And then also, I thought it was interesting about like how you thought about building like what, because it's interesting because on the outside people might perceive like, oh, it's a risky decision like starting your own, and but what you're doing is really smart because that you're really good at CS, and you have all these skills, so in a way it's like it's not risky at all because you're instead of like it that's I've never like have thought about that because I don't think there's a lot of people doing like what you're doing, but it makes so much sense because then you build like these strong relationships. You're getting with a company early enough, right, that you could potentially, not say get lucky, but like if you get in early enough, like that's so smart. So I've never thought of it that way, but I can see why someone would leave like a really good position and kind of do what you're doing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think like that risk calculation, the trade-offs that you make are around like your risk is time, like it's your time that you're investing, and you have to just you have finite bucket of time, so you have to decide how you want to spend that at all times. And so for me, it's just a decision of what I wanted to dedicate my time to and what I was gonna risk and invest my time in. But I think around the like success factors that you mentioned, like how do I know maybe that this could potentially work out? I think like it's like when someone's looking to do like a career or a role change internally, we or promotion, whatever, we say like the business need has to intersect with your personal goals. And for me, it's about calibrating around that. So like with companies I'm advising, do they have a business need and do I have a unique set of skills or experiences that could help them? And if so, then that's like a beautiful potential intersection where we could have like a partnership. And if not, then like on to the next. And so again, it's a little bit of luck. But in that way, if you think about it that way, it's not risky. It's just kind of a numbers game. Just like with anything with sales or BD, like you have to generate a pipeline of opportunities, and then you have to look for the intersection of like needs to value. And then if you find it, then you're going to have some legs to stand on.
Hmm. And all right, last two questions. I'm curious, like, what's something that like you've learned in CS that most people might think is like bogus? Like, yeah, does that make sense?
What do you mean by bogus?
Like what's something that like most CSMs do that you think is just like not effective? Like not like why do people still do this?
What's something that most CSMs do that I think is not effective? Okay, so I think one thing that a lot of CSMs do is they like over rotate on literally like connections with their customer, and they look at engagement with the customer as something that's really critical. And I think that actually engagement is not critical at all. Like how many times you meet the customer and how many times you do EBRs or how many times you have like weekly calls or monthly calls with them, it actually doesn't really make a difference. What makes a difference is if you measure that by the outcomes that they're getting to or the objectives that you understand their business has, and how much you help them achieve that with your business or solution or software or whatever it is. And so I think, when I ask CSMs about their job, or I ask a CS leader about their team and how they're engaging
Hmm.
customers, they're like, oh yeah, we're good. We have a great cadence. Like we talk to all of our customers, and,
Hmm.
we meet with them regularly, and we like talk to all of them, and you're like, okay, great. But that doesn't actually mean that you're providing value. How do you know that you're getting to outcomes? How are you really being prescriptive about making sure your CSM methodology is value based and not engagement based?
Yeah, that's good advice. I mean, I think that's applicable across like everything, right? Not just CS. So that's really good advice.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah,
then,
for sure. Like I think, in sales, it's like we're stuck with metrics sometimes. Like for AEs, like your managers probably look at like how many demos you do and how much pipeline you open. And it's all this like conversion and number stuff, right? So it kind of makes you think that volume matters and engagement metrics matter. But again, to my point, it's not about how many interactions you have. It's the quality of those interactions, and how you're measuring that can make a really big difference for your CS org.
hmm, that's good stuff. All right, last question. So you're feel like you're a really big proponent of like time management and truly valuing your time. So what's your advice on like essentially like cutting like the BS from your stuff, whether it's pipeline, your book, or just, just doing stuff just to show face or whatever, and then actually like prioritizing like what actually really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a huge one for me, and it's a huge like weakness that I've been working on for years and years and years. And that is not doing a bunch of stuff, just doing things that matter, and doing, my manager Kelly Bray at Slack would always say like, do fewer things, but do them better. And so I've been really trying to take that to heart and think about that. And so I think as an AE, thinking about like what prospects you really need to work with that are going to help you meet your quota, and just focusing on those, or what skill sets you need to develop that will help you close more deals. That's really important. And just in general for everyone, like having a prioritization framework, like know your North Stars of what you want to achieve in your career or with that project or with your team or whatever. And then like under those priorities, you have like initiatives that will help you get there, or like tasks that will help you get there. And if you're doing something, look at that list. And if the thing that you're doing doesn't drive one of those like top line initiatives or goals of yours, then you have to ask yourself, should I be spending time on this? Is this worth my time? Is this really contributing value for me? And so just having a prioritization framework of knowing the impact and the scope of the things you're doing is really helpful for you to draw a line. And like a good visual would be like, if you have a list of 10 things, you should be able to draw a line at 5, and then there has to be things that fall beneath the 5. And
Mm.
if you can't do that, then you're always going to have a list of 10 things, 20 things, 30 things. But if you can build that muscle memory of knowing how to draw lines and how to prioritize, then you're going to be someone who knows over time how to do fewer things better.
Good stuff. Yeah, I could see why you're crushing life. It's all really valuable stuff. Like I wish I like listen, I wish I had this advice when I was like younger in my career. I mean, it's still valuable, obviously, but I feel like, it's like one of those things like, man, like I wish I had these resources, like, even just like a year ago, right? So cool. Well, thank you, Linda. I really appreciate you. I'm excited for to see what you continue to create. Clearly like you get it, and it's cool to meet people that just have like that good balance of like the optimism, like the vision, right? The structures, the network, and yeah, like it's really cool to see. So I'm excited to. I'm sure there'll be many more conversations in the future. And yeah, best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much for having me.